Sarah Mitchell was washing dishes in her small kitchen in Gastonia, North Carolina, when the television in the living room displayed something that made her stomach tighten and her eyes fill with tears she hadn't expected to shed. On the screen, Steph Curry was celebrating another Warriors victory alongside Ayesha, his radiant wife, while their 3 children ran to embrace him on the court. "The most inspiring couple in the NBA," said the commentator. "Steph and Ayesha Curry continue to be an OTB example of true love and solid family in the world of sports." Sarah turned off the faucet with trembling hands and leaned against the sink, feeling the weight of 19 years of regret falling upon her like a silent avalanche. It was impossible not to remember a shy, short boy who had once asked to take her to the high school prom, to understand how a single decision by a 17-year-old girl changed the course of 2 lives forever. We need to go back to a spring afternoon in 2006, when Sarah Mitchell was the undisputed queen of Charlotte Christian School, and Steph Curry was just a scrawny kid with dreams too big for his small body. It was May 2006, and the air was charged with that specific energy of the end of the school year, a mixture of anticipated nostalgia and expectation for the future. Sarah was in her element, cheerleader for 3 consecutive years, girlfriend of the football team's quarterback, and owner of a popularity that made other students turn when she passed through the hallways. Have you ever been a teenager enough to know how cruel and inflexible the social hierarchy of high school can be? Sarah Mitchell was at the top of that pyramid, and Steph Curry was, well, somewhere she rarely noticed. Steph was 15 years old, measured about 1 meter and 65 centimeters, weighed maybe 55 kilograms soaking wet, and spent most of his time on the varsity basketball team's bench. He was known more for being Del Curry's son than for any achievement of his own. But there was something about Steph that few noticed at that time. A silent determination that burned behind his shy eyes, and a passion for basketball that transcended his physical appearance. And there was something more, an unrequited passion for Sarah Mitchell that made him blush whenever she passed by him in the hallways. "He's always staring at you," commented Jennifer Walsh, Sarah's best friend, while they were getting ready in the locker room after cheerleading practice. "It's kind of cute in a pathetic way." Sarah laughed, adjusting the bow in her hair. "Steph Curry? He's sweet, but, please, he can barely make a basket in basketball, let alone get a girl's attention. What's most impressive is how we can be so cruel without even realizing it, especially when we're young and think we know exactly how the world works." It was a Thursday when it happened. Steph had spent weeks gathering courage, practicing what he would say in the bathroom mirror at home, imagining 1,000 different scenarios. Prom was just 2 weeks away, and he knew it was his last chance. Sarah was in the courtyard with her cheerleader friends when Steph approached. She could see the determination in his steps, mixed with a nervousness that made his hands tremble slightly. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking a little in the middle of the word, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Sarah's friends exchanged glances that mixed amusement with cruel anticipation. You could feel that something was about to happen, something that would be remembered and retold for years. "Sure, Steph," said Sarah, without leaving her friends. Any privacy he hoped to have wouldn't exist. Steph took a deep breath, like a diver about to jump off a cliff. "Sarah, well, I wanted to know if you'd like to go to prom with me. I know I'm not the most popular guy in school, but I thought maybe—" The silence that followed was the kind that makes time seem to stop. Sarah looked at Steph, really looked, and saw a thin, awkward boy, wearing a shirt that seemed to have been borrowed from someone bigger, with hope shining in his eyes like stars on a dark night. And then, with the casual cruelty that only teenagers can produce, she destroyed those dreams with a laugh. "Steph," she said, her voice carrying a condescension that cut like ice, "you're really sweet for asking, but, well, I don't date losers from the bench. Maybe you should try with someone more at your level." The words echoed through the courtyard like stones thrown into a calm lake. Jennifer and the other girls laughed, not maliciously, but with that unconscious cruelty that popular teenagers use to maintain their social position. Steph stood there for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. His face went from hopeful to devastated, from vulnerable to resigned. He said nothing. He just nodded once, turned around, and walked away with a dignity that Sarah would only recognize years later. Great things happen when extraordinary people transform humiliation into motivation. But we rarely recognize that greatness when it's being forged right in front of us. At that moment, Sarah Mitchell believed she had simply rejected an invitation from someone below her social level. She didn't know she had just rejected someone who would use that pain as fuel to become one of the greatest legends in world sports. And she definitely didn't know that, years later, she would be watching that same loser boy, celebrating a perfect life, with a woman who saw in him exactly what Sarah had been unable to see. An extraordinary heart waiting for the opportunity to prove its worth. Steph Curry walked through the hallways of Charlotte Christian School that May afternoon as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his scrawny shoulders. Sarah and her friends' laughter still echoed in his mind like a cruel melody that refused to stop. Each step he took moved him further from the courtyard, but he couldn't distance himself from the humiliation that burned in his chest like liquid fire. He locked himself in the gym bathroom and stared at his reflection in the stained mirror. What he saw was exactly what Sarah had seen. A boy too small, too thin, too ordinary. Bench loser. The words echoed in his head like a final sentence. You could feel that something had broken inside Steph at that moment. Not just his confidence or his pride, but something much deeper, his faith in himself. That night, Steph came home and went straight to his room, ignoring his mother's calls for dinner. Sonia Curry, with that maternal intuition that always knew when something was wrong, knocked gently on the door. "Steph, my son, what happened? Have you ever tried to explain to someone you love how you feel when your dreams are publicly destroyed?" Steph discovered that some pains are too big for words. "Mom," he managed to say, his voice choked. "Maybe I should quit basketball. Maybe I'm not good enough for anything." Sonia entered the room and sat on the bed next to her son. She didn't need to know the details to understand that her boy had been hurt in a way that went beyond the physical. "Steph Curry," she said, her voice carrying that loving firmness that only mothers can produce, "you have something special inside you. Don't let other people define who you are or what you can become." But in those first weeks after the rejection, the words of encouragement seemed to echo in a void. Steph missed practice twice, something unthinkable for someone who lived and breathed basketball. When he was on the court, he played as if he were just fulfilling an obligation, without the passion that had previously defined him. Coach Kevin O'Connor noticed the change immediately. "Curry," he said, after a particularly apathetic practice, "where's your head lately? You look like a ghost of the person you were." Steph just shrugged, avoiding the coach's gaze. How could he explain that a romantic rejection had shaken his confidence in everything, including the one talent he thought he had. The turning point came 3 weeks later, during a game against Myers Park High School. Steph was on the bench, as always, watching the starters struggle against a superior team. It was then that he heard something that changed everything. "Look at their bench," laughed one of the opposing players during a timeout, discreetly pointing at Steph. "Even Dell, Curry's son, can't get off the bench. Must be weak genetics." Something ignited in Steph's chest at that moment. It wasn't anger. It was something much more powerful. Crystalline determination mixed with a thirst to prove everyone wrong. What's most impressive is how sometimes we need to hit rock bottom to find the strength we didn't even know we possessed. That night, Steph went home and did something he hadn't done since Sarah's rejection. He went to the backyard court and started training, not with the casual joy of before, but with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He shot for 2 straight hours until his hands bled. Each shot was accompanied by a silent promise. "I'm going to show everyone. I'm going to show Sarah. I'm going to show myself." Dell Curry, watching from the kitchen window, recognized something in his son that he himself had felt during his NBA career. It was the moment when a young athlete chooses between giving up or transforming completely. "Sonia," he said to his wife, "our boy found his fire." The months that followed were of radical transformation. Steph grew 8 centimeters during the summer, not by magic, but because finally his body was catching up to his determination. He gained 15 kilograms of muscle through obsessive training and a discipline that impressed even veterans. But the most important change wasn't physical. It was mental. Steph had stopped seeing his rejection as proof of inadequacy and started seeing it as fuel for excellence. During his senior year at Charlotte Christian, Steph was no longer the shy boy from the bench. He was the team leader, the shooter that other players stopped to watch, the athlete that college scouts came specifically to observe. Sarah Mitchell watched some of these transformations from afar. She saw Steph dominate games, lead his team to important victories, receive offers from prestigious universities. And in each of these occasions, she felt a pang of something she couldn't name. Regret mixed with admiration. "Did you see Steph Curry today?" Jennifer Walsh commented after a game where Steph had scored 35 points. "Who would have thought that shy boy would become this?" Sarah nodded, but couldn't respond, because she was beginning to understand that she had rejected not just an invitation to prom, but the chance to meet someone truly special before the whole world discovered what she had lost. Great things happen when we transform our greatest pain into the source of our greatest strength. And Steph Curry was about to discover that his transformation journey was just beginning. When he graduated and received a full scholarship to Davidson College, Steph knew he had become a completely different person. But he still didn't know he was about to meet someone who would see in him exactly what Sarah Mitchell had been unable to see: an extraordinary heart disguised as an ordinary boy. It was September 2008, and Steph Curry was in his 3rd year at Davidson College when his life changed in a way he never could have anticipated. It wasn't during an epic game against a famous university, nor when he broke another 3-point shooting record. It was at a simple church party, when he saw a girl with a radiant smile talking to a group of children as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ayesha Alexander was 19 years old, was visiting Davidson with family friends, and possessed something that Steph recognized immediately, an authenticity that shone from the inside out. She didn't know who he was in basketball, and that was exactly what attracted him. "Excuse me," said Steph, approaching the group where Ayesha was telling stories to the children. "Can I join you? It looks like you're having more fun here than anywhere else at the party." Ayesha looked at him, really looked, not with the calculating eyes of someone evaluating social status, but with the genuine curiosity of someone who found an E2C interesting soul. You could feel that there was something different about that moment. It wasn't superficial chemistry based on appearance or popularity. It was the deep recognition of two people who complemented each other in ways they didn't even know they needed. "Sure," said Ayesha, smiling in a way that made Steph completely forget the pain he had carried for years. "I'm Ayesha, and I was just telling these children about how my grandmother made the best cookies in the world." Have you ever met someone and immediately felt that your life had just taken a completely new direction? Steph was discovering that there's an abysmal difference between adolescent passion based on one-sided admiration and true connection based on shared values. They talked for hours that night. Not about basketball, not about fame or achievements. They talked about family, about faith, about dreams that went beyond any sports court. Ayesha told about her passion for cooking and her dream of one day having a TV show where she could teach families to cook together. Steph shared his vision of using basketball as a platform to positively impact underserved communities. "You know," said Ayesha, as they walked across campus under the stars, "you have a very special way of talking about your dreams. It's not about you. It's about what you can do for others." At that moment, Steph understood something that would forever change his perspective on relationships. Sarah Mitchell had rejected him for not being enough for her. Ayesha Alexander was being attracted exactly to the person he had become through that pain. The months that followed were a constant discovery. Ayesha supported Steph not because he was becoming a basketball star, but because she saw in him a man of character who would use any success to bless others. Steph found in Ayesha not just a girlfriend, but a partner who challenged him to be the best version of himself. What's most impressive is how true love doesn't try to change you, but inspires you to grow in the direction of who you were already destined to become. During the 2008-2009 season, while Steph led Davidson on a magical March Madness journey that captured the attention of all America, Ayesha was in the stands, not as an athlete's girlfriend seeking attention, but as a woman who genuinely celebrated the achievements of the man she loved. "Did you see that boy from Davidson?" Sports commentators talked about Steph. "He's rewriting the rules about what's possible in college basketball." But for Ayesha, Steph wasn't that boy from Davidson. He was the man who called her after each game, not to talk about statistics, but to thank her for her prayers and share how he wanted to use his growing platform to make a difference in the world. In 2009, when Steph declared for the NBA draft and was selected by the Golden State Warriors, he and Ayesha already knew they would build something much bigger than individual careers. They would build a family based on love, faith, and shared purpose. The wedding happened in July 2011, in an intimate ceremony that celebrated not just the union of two people, but the confirmation that Steph had found exactly what Sarah Mitchell never could have offered: unconditional love based on character, not status. Ayesha Curry, now officially part of the family, became much more than an athlete's wife. She built her own culinary empire, launched recipe books, created TV shows, and together with Steph, established foundations that impacted thousands of lives. "The most beautiful thing about Steph and Ayesha," wrote a sports journalist years later, "is that they became bigger together than they could have been separately." That's what happens when two genuinely extraordinary people find each other. In 2025, 14 years after the wedding, Steph and Ayesha Curry had become one of the most admired couples, not just in sports, but in American society. They had 3 beautiful children, multiple successful businesses, 4 NBA titles, and a foundation that had transformed entire communities. But perhaps most impressive was how they still looked at each other at public events, with the same wonder and genuine admiration from that first night at Davidson when two souls recognized in each other exactly what they were looking for. Great things happen when we let our pain prepare us to recognize and value true love when it finally arrives. And while Steph Curry celebrated a life built on authentic love and shared purpose, Sarah Mitchell watched from afar, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had lost by judging a book by its cover instead of reading the pages of the heart. March 2025. Sarah Mitchell, now Sarah Garcia, after her marriage 5 years ago, was organizing donated clothes at the Gastonia Community Center when her phone vibrated with an Instagram notification. It was a photo of Steph and Ayesha Curry celebrating their 14th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children in a setting that looked like something out of a fairy tale. 14 years building a legacy of love, family, and positive impact on the world, read Ayesha's caption. Grateful every day for this extraordinary man and the life we've built together. Sarah turned off her phone and returned to work, but her hands trembled slightly. At 36 years old, she had learned to live with the weight of knowing she had rejected not just an invitation to prom, but the chance to meet one of the most extraordinary people of her generation. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to carry the knowledge that a single decision changed the course of 2 lives forever? Sarah had spent the last 19 years living exactly with that reality. Her current life was simple, but honest. Married to Brian Garcia, a dedicated firefighter who met her at her worst phase and chose to love her anyway. Sarah had found a quiet happiness very different from the superficial popularity she pursued as a teenager. "Sarah," said Brian, entering the community center to pick her up after work, "are you okay? You seem thoughtful." Sarah smiled at her husband, a genuine man who saw her as the woman she had become, not as the cruel girl she had been. Just thinking about how time changes people. What's most impressive is how sometimes we need to completely lose who we were to discover who we can really become. Sarah's transformation had begun in 2009, when she watched Steph lead Davidson on a magical March Madness run. Seeing him on national television, articulate in interviews, gracious in both victory and defeat, she had the first real perception of what she had lost. "My God," she whispered to herself at that time, "I rejected that boy because I thought he wasn't enough for me." The following years were a continuous lesson in humility. Sarah watched Steph get drafted into the NBA, meet Ayesha, marry in a ceremony that seemed to celebrate not just love, but shared purpose. Each NBA title, each broken milestone, each charitable initiative was a reminder of the extraordinary character she had been unable to recognize. In 2015, when Steph won his first MVP and became the face of the NBA, Sarah was working as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic in Gastonia, still trying to find her place in the world. She had gone through 2 failed relationships, a deep identity crisis, and finally therapy that helped her confront who she really was. "Sarah," said her therapist, Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, during a particularly difficult session, "you can't change the past, but you can choose who you want to be from now on." It was around this time that Sarah began the volunteer work that would eventually become her passion. Working with at-risk youth, she found purpose in helping teenagers not make the same judgment mistakes she had made. "You know," she frequently told groups of young people, "when I was a teenager, I rejected someone because I thought he wasn't cool enough for me. That person became Steph Curry. And you know what I learned? That we should never judge someone's potential based on superficial appearances." The story became part of her motivational talks for teenagers about bullying and social exclusion. She used her own experience as an example of how adolescent cruelty can have lasting consequences, not just for those who are rejected, but for those who reject. In 2019, during one of these talks, a 15-year-old girl raised her hand. "Mrs. Garcia, have you ever had the chance to talk to Steph Curry about this?" Sarah smiled sadly. "No, and I would never seek out that opportunity. He built a beautiful life with an extraordinary woman. The last thing he needs is to be reminded of painful moments from the past." You could feel that Sarah had learned one of life's most difficult lessons. Sometimes loving someone means leaving them in peace to be happy without you. In 2023, Sarah received an unexpected opportunity. The Eat, Learn, Play Foundation, created by Steph and Ayesha Curry, was looking for local coordinators for community programs. Sarah applied, not because she expected to interact with the Currys, but because she genuinely believed in the mission. To her surprise, she was accepted. During the virtual orientation, she briefly saw Steph, on screen, talking about the importance of giving opportunities to young people who others might underestimate. "Every young person deserves the chance to show their potential," said Steph, not knowing that one of the people listening had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. Great things happen when we transform our greatest regrets into our greatest source of wisdom, and then use that wisdom to prevent others from making the same mistakes. Now, in March 2025, Sarah coordinated 3 community programs that had impacted more than 200 families. Her marriage to Brian was solid, built on honesty, shared values, and mature love. She had found a peace that adolescent popularity never could have offered. That night, while preparing dinner, Sarah watched the sports news showing Steph being honored for his social impact through basketball. Beside him, Ayesha radiated genuine pride, not for her husband's fame, but for the man he was. "Brian," said Sarah, serving the dinner she had prepared with love, a skill she learned out of necessity, very different from the culinary empire that Ayesha had built out of passion. "Did you know I could have been part of that story?" Brian, who knew the whole story, took his wife's hand. "Sarah, you are part of your own story, and it's a beautiful story." Sarah smiled, finally at peace with the choices that brought her there. She wasn't Ayesha Curry, living a dream life alongside a sports legend. She was Sarah Garcia, a woman who had learned through pain that true value comes from character, not status. And perhaps, she thought, looking out the window at the stars, that was exactly the lesson she needed to learn. Sometimes we lose something extraordinary to discover who we really are. And sometimes, that's exactly what we needed. The girl who rejected Steph Curry had become a woman who dedicated her life to teaching others to recognize the value in every person. And in that, perhaps she had found her own kind of greatness.